HR Sarah told me this conversation was confidential. She closed the door. She took notes. She promised discretion. What I didn't know was that this meeting wasn't to protect me. It was to document me. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why going to HR was the biggest mistake of my career. My name's Daniel. I'd worked at this company for just over 7 years, long enough to remember when the office still smelled like cheap carpet and burnt coffee, long enough to survive restructures, rebrands, and leadership changes, long enough to train people who later became my managers. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't political, I was reliable, the kind of employee who fixed problems quietly, stayed late when things went wrong, didn't complain unless it mattered. My performance reviews were consistent, not perfect, not concerning, just solid. At the time, I thought that was enough. I was wrong. Everything changed when Mark arrived. Mark was an external hire, mid-40s, MBA energy, big on words like optics and alignment. At first it was subtle. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence in meetings. "Let's park that, Daniel." He questioned decisions he'd already approved. "Why did you do it that way?" When I reminded him he'd signed off, he'd say, "I don't remember that." That detail matters later. Then came the one-on-ones. No agenda, no notes, just Mark leaning back in his chair saying things like, "Some people feel you're not very flexible." I'd ask who. He'd smile and say, "I can't name names." That's when the anxiety started. Sunday nights became unbearable. I rehearsed conversations in my head, second-guessed emails, over-explained everything. I started documenting incidents, dates, times, exact wording. Nothing changed. That's when I convinced myself HR existed for moments like this. Her name was Sarah, early 30s, soft voice, always calm. She booked a small glass meeting room, closed the door, and then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Before we start, I want you to know this conversation is confidential." That sentence lowered my guard. I told her everything. The public corrections, the private undermining, the slow pressure that made every day feel heavier. At one point I said, "I'm starting to dread coming into work." Sarah nodded, typed notes, asked follow-up questions. She didn't interrupt me once. At the time, that felt reassuring. Looking back, she wasn't listening to help. She was listening to categorize. She said she'd speak to Mark discreetly. She said retaliation wouldn't be tolerated. She said, "You did the right thing by coming to us." I walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. That relief lasted exactly 7 days. The following week, Mark changed. Not better, sharper. He started using my words, my exact words. In meetings, he'd say things like, "Daniel has admitted he struggles with morale." I never said that. I said work was affecting me. He started questioning my tone in emails. "You seem resistant." That word again, resistant. This is where I should have known what was coming next. Then the calendar invite arrived. Mandatory meeting Daniel. Mark. HR no agenda. My stomach dropped. Sarah was already in the room. Mark wouldn't make eye contact. Sarah slid a document across the table. It was titled Employee Performance Summary. It wasn't about Mark, it was about me. My HR meeting had been rewritten into bullet points. Displays emotional distress at work. Expresses dissatisfaction with leadership. Demonstrates resistance to feedback. I stared at the page. Those weren't my words. Those were interpretations. Sarah read the document slowly, like it wasn't hers, like she hadn't written it. That's when I realized something. HR doesn't accuse. HR summarizes. I reminded Sarah about confidentiality. She leaned back and said, "Confidential doesn't mean it can't be acted upon." Mark finally spoke. "We're just concerned about your fit here." Fit. I was formally written up that day. No investigation into Mark, no mediation, no protection, just consequences, based on my honesty. After that meeting, everything made sense. Why Sarah asked certain questions, why she typed so much, why Mark suddenly knew everything. 2 months later, Mark was promoted. I resigned shortly after. Not because I had to, because I finally understood the truth. HR doesn't exist to protect employees. HR exists to protect the company from risk. And sometimes, you are the risk. HR didn't lie to me. They just didn't protect me. And that distinction matters more than most employees realize. If you've worked corporate, you already know this story. Subscribe for more.